this is the first cycle for Art Block. It's Through the Lens, and this is the introduction, a day late. So through the lens, when somebody says through the lens, they are referring to viewing and thinking about something from different perspectives. You might hear this a lot in maybe history class, where you're looking at a historical event through different perspectives, through the winning side, through the losing side, through the, people that had to clean up afterwards side, those kind of things. So in this cycle, we're combining the concepts of gaze and perspectives with photography. And photography literally views the world through a lens. And there is a good quote there. We see the world through the lens of all of our experiences. That's a fundamental part of the human condition, meaning that our experiences, our personal experiences, shape the way that we view the world and think about it and react to it. So your studio prompt that you can start thinking about now, it's not due until the 18th, and you can start playing with it, but until you get all the information from all the parts, it would be hard to really understand what it means. But the studio prompt is to use digital photography to create a series of portraits that address a particular aspect of a contemporary issue. Apply your knowledge of gaze and perspective to communicate the viewpoint, and editing your photos wisely, keeping in mind composition, aspect ratio, and visual perspective, which is angles. And I'll break all that down. And here you have two single portraits that kind of do what I want you to do, which is to create portraits and applying these things so that you can understand the person's viewpoint about something or how they're impacted by it, even if you aren't quite aware of what the issue itself is. So breaking it down, your content, first bit, use digital photography to create a series of portraits that address a particular aspect of a contemporary issue. Digital photography means you take your photos on a cell phone camera or a digital camera. If you don't have a cell phone and you need to check out a digital camera, please let me know. A series is 3 to 5 separate but related images. So the minimum you submit are 3 good finished images, and the maximum is 5. And they have to be related. A portrait is the image of a person, usually a face, but you can include bodies with this assignment, but it's focused on pretty much one person. All of your images should be of the same person. You could do self-portraits, but those are more difficult unless you have experience with cameras and tripods, or even your cell phone and tripods and things of that nature. Selfies are pretty common. People take lots of those. But to get what you want and to do the staging and things, you might want to draft somebody to be your model. The particular aspect is a point of view or experience with the issue that you choose. So you're showing us one thing about it through this person's portraits. Your contemporary issues, think about things that are happening right now. And think about the big ticket issues that people really have strong opinions about. So think about the experience of the pandemic, which we're all living through and have been for a while. And with that could come along things like isolation and psychology and education and things of that nature, how people are reacting to those things, wearing masks, having to do all the things we do now. Think about Black Lives Matter, the protests this summer and that issue. Think about the natural disasters and how people react to that. It's been about 2 years since Hurricane Florence here, but there is still some aftermath and still some things that are being reconstructed. But also, this has been a weird year for natural disasters. In North Carolina, we had a hurricane and an earthquake in the same week. They had a rare landlocked hurricane that hardly anybody knows about that happened out in the Midwest. As we speak, this is the last week of August. There are the hurricane and tropical storms that exist at the same time that are headed for the same place on the Texas-Louisiana border. Lots of weird national disasters. MMIW, that is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, which has to do with calling awareness to the amount of Native American and Native Hispanic women that are murdered or missing, that are kind of ignored by the press. Politics, of course, and anything else that you find is happening right now that is important, that you have something strong to say about it, and you are putting forth your point of view or your experience with this topic. I have experience with some of these things and not others. Of course, the pandemic, lived through that, and I've been kind of out of the picture for a lot of the rest of it, or too afraid to leave my house to participate, even in the things that I support, because I am a protester by nature. But I do work with the missing and murdered Indigenous women, because I do forensics as part of that. Context. Apply your knowledge of gaze and perspective to communicate the viewpoint. So gaze is what you learned about gaze, which is one of the weak cycles, and it focuses a lot on psychological power and controlling the viewer. So it's the psychological power that's present in the image itself, but also how you control how people look at your image. Perspective. Think about societal perspectives, how images can communicate viewpoints on a subject, where you can look at an image and know how the person feels, what side of the issue that they are experiencing or supporting. Viewpoint itself is a particular aspect of the issue that you're addressing. Choose one and focus on communicating that. So if you choose a broad issue, and I'm just using the pandemic as an example because we've all experienced that, what are you addressing? Are you going to address if it's your belief that masks, impede your freedoms and that you shouldn't have to wear one, shouldn't be required to? Or are you going to address your anger at people that do not wear masks and put people at risk? Are you going to address the psychological impact of having to be more isolated, whether that was a negative thing for you or whether that's a positive thing for you? Okay? Because everything has multiple viewpoints. And speak about what you know. That's the same advice they give you if you're trying to write a novel or make a movie. It's if you work with what you know, what you experience, what you feel strongly about, it's going to be much better. Much good art. That's bad grammar, but good art. Okay. Technically, edit your photographs wisely. Keep in mind composition, aspect ratio, and visual perspective, which is angles. So editing is the manipulation both before and after the photo. So these are not just randomly shot things. Okay, so you're going to have to stage the model. You're going to have to pose your model. If it's yourself, you are going to have to take and experiment with how you set up your camera to get the right angles and to get the right perspective. After you take your images, there will be cropping and adjusting and additions. So you might, need to use filters. You might decide to go with black and white. You'll manipulate the exposure and the light balance and those things that we learn in the photography week. And expect to take a lot of photos, because if you take 3 photos and turn in those 3 photos, chances are they are not going to be the best that you could have gotten. When I shoot things and want to do, get a good photo, I take extremely high numbers of photos. I have thousands and thousands and thousands of photos in storage, on my devices. Okay. Your composition is how everything is arranged, and we'll talk about that during photography week. How you use the compositional aids on your camera and editing programs to make your composition tighter, what a good composition looks like. Your aspect ratio is your length to width, or the resolution of your pictures on the camera. So make sure that your photos are large enough in pixels for printing as well as web display. So you want to shoot big, lots of things, because you have more information to play with. And then your visual perspective, which is using visual perspective, 1 point, 2 point, etc., when staging and shooting to enhance meaning. This requires some planning and some experimenting. Again, that's photography week. And depending upon your perspectives, if you're shooting a person and you're like with a camera and you're straight in front of them, think like school portrait kind of picture, mugshot kind of picture, that's the plainest perspective possible. Think about if you were above them, or shooting from behind them, or to the side, or laying on the ground looking up at them. Really think about where you're going to put your body and the model's body, and then angle the camera. So the components, so that you can do this, you have component 1, which is lessons on gaze and what gaze is and how to use it. Component 2, lessons on perspective and how to use that. And component 3, which is photography. This is mostly online for the B cohort, because you only have 1 day in the actual studio. And hopefully, if things go according to the plan of schools, everybody else will have, I think, A gets 5 days and C gets 4 days. Or C gets 5 days and A gets 4 days because of Labor Day. So your pacing, the first week, A is doing gaze, B will be doing the photography studio, and C is perspective. And then week 2, A is perspective online, B is gaze online, and C comes in for the photography studio. Week 3 is A is photography studio, B is perspective online, and C is gaze online. Okay? Now these weeks are all instructional weeks. You have a week after that, before the summative studio project and the critical writing are due. But remember, in that week after that, we will have also started the next cycle, okay, our next lessons. So that's why I tell you this at the beginning of the whole cycle, so that you can kind of think about it while you are working and learning these other things, and experiment and practice and figure it out so we can get it together. Okay? If you have questions, please let me know. I will revisit this later as things evolve and schedules change or don't change. But I expect some really, really outstanding work that we can share with the world.